Welcome to the Catholic Intellectual Podcast. Our guest today is Professor Roy Domenico from the History Department at the University of Scranton. I'm Professor Stephen Doherty from the Mathematics Department at the University of Scranton. So welcome, Roy.
Thank you very much for having me.
So could you start off by telling us about your education?
Okay, but first, let's dedicate this show to Tony Sirico and Larry Storch, a.k.a. Paulie Walnuts and Sergeant Corporal Agard. That's right. Two greats who've just lost. Anyway, yes, my background is entirely lay. I was not in fact, I was not a Catholic. I'm a convert.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I'm a mutt, and my grandfather married a Norwegian, and abandoned the faith essentially, because they abandoned him. You know, he was excommunicated. He wasn't excommunicated, but he was like nobody would talk to him.
Yeah.
Right. And then my father was brought up without anything really, and he married this a Baptist, Anglo Baptist from the South, and my mother was a Sunday school teacher for a while, but we didn't really have anything growing up either. So it wasn't until I was in grad school that I converted to Catholicism.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, I was brought up. Technically, I was brought up as a Methodist.
Oh.
So yeah.
So the only Italian part, you only had one Italian
Yeah,
grandparent,
my grandfather.
right?
Yeah, my grandfather. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I'm a mutt.
So where were you in graduate school at the time?
When I converted,
Yeah.
Rutgers. I was at Rutgers.
Not a Catholic school either.
No. My education is entirely lay. I went as an undergrad to Wisconsin and Milwaukee, and then I went to University of Connecticut for my master's, and Rutgers for my PhD.
Yeah. What drew you to those schools?
Well, okay. The undergrad, I had nothing drew me. Right? I was one of those things where, okay, I guess it's time to go to college, and where do I go? And I was living in Milwaukee at the time, and so I said, I'll go there. And for example, I always thought about this. Marquette had no attraction to me whatsoever.
Oh.
That was for rich kids, Marquette. And so, I had, at that time, 18 years old, 19 years old, I had that kind of like spirit. I'm going to be with the people. None of those Marquette characters. And Wisconsin, Milwaukee is one of those kind of schools. It was like progressive and all that kind of stuff. So I liked that. And then I went to Bologna in my junior year. And I said, "This is it. I know what I'm doing." And I consider myself primarily an Italian historian of Italy, and so I spent the year in Bologna, and I said I'm going to go to grad school. When I started grad school, one of the leading lights, if you talk to Italianists, you'd find out that Emiliana Noether is a legend, and so I went to Connecticut where she was. And by the way, all my advisors were women, right? Uh-huh. Yeah, and so I got my master's with Emiliana Noether, and who was a great lady. I loved her. And then I decided I'm going to take a year off and see what it does, because I still wasn't hooked into academics. So I worked for a bank for a year, and it was an Italian bank, the Banca Commerciale Italiana, in Chicago. And I asked the boss, well, why did you hire me anyway? And he said, because you have a history degree. He says, we can always teach you the business. That's no big deal. And also he said, you've got good reading behind you, and you can write reports and that kind of stuff. So I said, oh, that's nice. But then I worked for the bank for a year, and I said, yeah, get me out of here. And I went to Rutgers for a couple of reasons. They had a new Italian historian there, Victoria de Grazia, and friend lived there. So
deep philosophical reasons.
Exactly. That's why I said I went to Rutgers, and I was very happy. Again, Rutgers was a great school. I'm very glad I was there, and it's really established itself as one of the, it's really a premier historical school, especially in the history of women.
I did not know that.
I mentioned as far as a Catholic historian, I slowly evolved into that. I remember early on I was going to St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York, and George Weigel was supposed to give a talk on John Paul II, right? And he couldn't make it. So the people in charge said, well, here's this Domenico guy. call him up. So I went there to give it, and they said, Weigel couldn't make it, but here's Roy Domenico. People started getting up and walking out. And it reminded me of The Third Man. Remember when Joseph Cotton is giving his lecture?
Yeah, yeah.
And Wilfred Hyde White is sitting there, Mr. Crabbin, and people are just like, yeah, okay. So I'm like Weigel 2.0 kind of thing. So that kind of established my reputation. So, anyway.
As a good man to walk
Yes,
out on the top.
yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes. On the bottom line, I consider myself a historian of Italy. My dissertation was on the purges against fascists after the Second World War under Vittoria de Grazia, who just retired. I just went to. She's at Columbia now, so I went to her party and it was fantastic. I've never been to that nice of an academic affair.
Uh-huh.
It was really spectacular. And it went all day. It was a conference. I gave a paper, and all of her. I was her first grad student.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So and then we all had a reception, and she was getting tanked. I think she was enjoying herself, but she said she's in the middle of this thing, and then we went out to dinner after that. But she said, "I love Rutgers," right? And she says, "And I love Columbia, and I love Italy," and everybody erupted in applause. You know, she was great, and the guy, another key guy in my upbringing is Lamberto Mercuri in Rome, because she hooked me up with him, and he was my mentor as much as anybody was. He was a great man, and he was a resistance guy in the Second World War. So was his wife. She was the Nazis caught her, and I was it's unbelievable, tortured her and the whole thing, and they were so wonderful to me. You know, I really loved being with them. You know, so I dedicated my second book to them.
How much time did you spend in Italy during that time?
Well, I don't know. If I mean, in my dissertation, I went over there for the year to work in Rome mainly, and then in a couple other places. I went to Milan for a month, and then I went to London for a month, and I went to Bern for a week or two to work in the archives there. So and then since then I've been going essentially back for periods, 6 months sometimes, and just I enjoy it.
So what during that period drew you to Catholicism?
Being in Rome, working on my dissertation, and I began to go to the Church of Santa Susanna in Rome, which was the old American church. It used to be before they built the street. It used to be next to the old American embassy, literally next door, and then they tore down the American embassy to build the street.
Oh.
And it was run by, I think, it was some kind of nuns. I think somebody said they were Augustinian nuns. I don't know, but don't ask me. But anyway, they were just pains in the neck, and we were the Americans. I was a parishioner actually for a while. Were there for 80 years or something like that, and then finally they said, "Get out. That's it. We're done." And they threw them out, and they wandered for a while, and then they went back in for briefly. And that was neat because I was there when they went back into it. In the meantime, they were in Sant'Agnese in the Piazza Navona. They were there for a while, and then they went back to Santa Susanna. And the thing was, John Paul negotiated the agreement to let them back in, and the celebratory mass was, and he said it. He celebrated it, and I got a ticket to go, and I never saw it. This is weird. I was sitting in the aisle, and here comes and the titular head of the church is the Archbishop of Boston. It's run by the Paulists though. The Paulists run the thing, and so they're all coming down the main aisle and so forth, and there were some Japanese guys standing in front of me, directly seated in front of me. I don't know what happened, but as John Paul's going down the aisle, he turns right and goes right into that aisle and goes to this Japanese guy and holds his head and talks to him, and they talk for about 30 seconds, and then he turned around and went back out to the aisle, and I said, what the hell was that all about? So I don't know, but that was kind of a neat thing. And then it broke down. They kicked them Americans out again anyway. So now they're in St. Patrick's Church, which is right by the American Embassy. I mean, the Americans moved in there like in 43, I guess it was.
Did he say the mass in English or in Italian?
I think most of it was in English, as I recall. Yeah. I mean, there was the American church, so I mean, there were Italian masses, throughout the week and everything. But yeah, so a lot of celebrities actually used to go there. You know who was buried there was Carol O'Connor's son.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was there for a while, but then they took his body out. I don't know where he went after that. I guess Carol O'Connor gave money to the church. And a lot of there was a very famous American woman, a jazz woman named Bricktop, in the 40s and 50s. The groovy time, and she was a big funder for the church and that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
Well, there was that tradition in Rome that they always wanted to be allied with an American cardinal because that's where the money came from.
Well, that church in particular, I mean, most churches don't have any American titular heads. The other famous one that I know of is the Church of Saint Paul and John, I think it is. It's right up they call it the Clevo. It's a little kind of like alleyway that goes up of, I think it's the Aventine Hill from Saint Gregory the Great, down by the Circus Maximus, and you take that up, and right in the middle of it is the Church of John and Paul, and that's the Archbishop of New York. He's the head of that one.
Well, still, every cardinal needs to have a church in Rome that they're the titular head of, right?
Yeah,
they might
right.
never visited there, but
Yeah. I think they do. They try to do something once in a while. Yeah, but I mean, the guy from Boston rarely goes to the American church. He'll be in Rome with an ad libitum visit or something to the Pope and probably not go. It's like, I got to go over there. All right.
So, in terms of the Catholic intellectual tradition, it seems like Italy is the place to study because that's where where a lot of it happened, right? And if it didn't happen there, it still went through the auspices of the Roman Church.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is, to me, that was very impressive about the Catholic culture of Italy. That's what I work on mostly. The politics and culture, and it. You don't realize it. For example, like having a patron saint of your city, that's not very common in the United States. But in Italy, everybody knows the patron saints, and the big cities have holidays, on the patron saints. The small cities too. And one of the first experiences of that was Bologna with San Petronio. I mean, and which I believe is like early October 4th, maybe. I don't know, which is St. Francis Day, but that's a neat thing, and
like
it's
Santobaldo and Gubbio.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like I say, St. Ambrose in Milan, and, they call Milan the Ambrosian city, after St. Ambrose. So that's a very living kind of tradition that appealed to me, that, and then I think kind of like the people's kind of like knowledge, and it's a folk knowledge. It's not an intellectual knowledge, It's a folk knowledge of the traditions and so forth, and they'll say things like, "He's a good Christian," we wouldn't see that here. I remember when I was there when John Paul died, right, and I was working in the archives, and I would take the bus in from our apartment, and I was riding on the bus, and going downtown, and the people on the bus, they didn't know each other. This was a very eclectic group of people, some yuppie types and some, pensioners, and they were talking about who would be the next pope, and they were all very serious about it, and like I say, you'd never see that in the United States. And one guy, an older guy, said, "I had a dream last night, and the Holy Spirit came to me and and said that, I forget who he said. They said, but this is the guy who's going to be the Pope, and they were all nodding their heads. That's very interesting. And there was no sarcasm or snarkiness or anything like that. They were all very interested in what he had to say. That is impressive to me. I was.
What do you think about? Did you remember when John Paul first became Pope?
Yeah.
Because I remember when John Paul I died after a month, and everyone was shocked. And then they picked a Polish Pope.
Yeah.
And when I remember in our church when people were saying they picked a new Pope, he's Polish, everybody thought it was a joke.
Yeah,
They're like,
right.
no, it's not a joke. He's honestly. Well, they said, but no, he has to be
Yeah.
Italian. How do you think they viewed that they chose?
Well, I think because he was a pretty popular Pope in Italy, so I don't think they held it against him.
Well, he did come out in that first day and spoke in Italian
Yeah.
and referred to Italian as our language. Do you remember that? He
Yeah.
made that.
Well, he like I say, I think he was a pretty popular guy. I mean, and I think the Italians understood. I mean, you can't own the place. I mean, they since Pope Hadrian in the 16th century, they controlled it. So, and.
I think the old saying was, it doesn't matter where the Pope comes from, 5 minutes in Rome, you're a Roman.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? I mean, you put on the robes and you look around and you're awed by the tradition, by the history, and you no longer feel your old self, you feel a new person.
I think one of the things like that was that really endeared John Paul to the Romans was his hiking out in the countryside around Rome and Abruzzo and stuff like that. There was another classic shot where he was sleeping under a tree. Somebody got the shot of him doing that, and they said, "That is pretty neat. He's one of us." So that was fun.
Yeah, I don't think Pius XII slept under a tree.
No, Pius, he wouldn't have done that. Pius XI would have, but not Pius XII. But Pius XI was a hiker too. He enjoyed mountaineering and that kind of stuff. So yeah.
So some of your work dealt with fascism in Italy in the center of the last century. How do you think fascism developed there amidst this culture of Catholicism?
It's I don't know. It's what I'm doing right now. I'm writing a thing on World War II in Italy, and in Italian history there's a argument called the Brava Gente argument that the Italians are nice people and they don't do bad things, right? and okay, that's not, how can you completely buy that, but there's something to that. I think Italy has a genteel, very loving culture based on church and family. I think those things are very strong. To ignore that it doesn't make any sense. You can't ignore that because it's there, and how fascism pierced that, that they can do some nuts and bolts things. Mussolini said, well, not when he came to power, but later on, he said, we're going to patch things up with the Pope, because the Italian government and the Pope hated each other. Right? Ever since 1870, the Italian government attacked Rome, took the city away from the Pope, and the Pope said, "You can go to hell." and so the Pope excommunicated the Italian government and said no good Italian could vote in Italian elections and stuff like that. So in other words, he left the whole Italian state up to the anti-clericals, right? And they ran it until Mussolini came to power. Really, there was inklings of some kind of patching up going on before he came to power, and Mussolini, of course, was no Catholic at all. I mean,
he was an avowed atheist.
He was, yeah. He had that famous, I think it was a debate in Switzerland. He was a tramp in Switzerland, and he said, "If God hears me, strike me dead right now. I'll give you 5 seconds." And he did. He stood there. Come on, let's go. And that's Mussolini. I mean, he wrote a pornographic novel called The Cardinal's Mistress.
Oh my gosh.
Stuff like he there's no question about it. He was married in a civil ceremony, but then like in 25 he marries her in a church ceremony. Just to say, here I come, and he starts giving the Pope presents and stuff. I mean, like the Piccolomini Library from Siena, he gave to the Vatican, and so then in 29 he patched everything up and created the Vatican City, and the Pope Pius XI called him the Man from Providence, and it was enormously popular. That was the high point of his popularity. That some people say the conquest of Ethiopia was too. That may be, but I think 29 Lateran Pacts with the two was the high point, and so there was a lot of people who were beholden to him for that, you know, I would say one thing about the Ethiopian conquest in '36 was that kind of, it was a high point definitely, but it starts to mark the downfall too, and with the alliance with Hitler, and then the anti-Semitic stuff, and Pius XI said, what are you doing? You know, like, that's ridiculous, and he condemns Italian fascism to some extent in a couple of places, particularly in 1931. He condemns it as violent, and then comes the war, and one thing I'm saying in this book is it's one thing you see is Mussolini's regime just dissolves. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's taking a hit everywhere, and as he dissolves, the Pope is rising. Now people are turning to the Pope. They're turning to free politics as well, but the Pope is involved in free politics too, because there's going to be the rising Christian Democratic Party, so one of the most thrilling examples of the Second World War was the bombing of Rome in July of '43, which is a week before Mussolini falls from power, and Rome had not been bombed up until that point, and it's a controversial thing because they said, well, why not? Why hasn't Rome been bombed? Why haven't they been held off on that kind of stuff? And they said, well, and it's true. The Pope was negotiating. Let's keep Rome, you know, pristine. And also, there's so many Vatican properties besides the Vatican City in Rome. You know, it's kind of risky to bomb anything in Rome because you'll hit something that's run by the Vatican. And so so what had happened was, that was July 19th. On July 10th, 11th, the Allies land in Sicily. The beginning of the end. Mussolini goes up to talk to Hitler on the 19th. He's speaking to him there. The generals are all saying, Ben, just get out of this. You know, tell Hitler it's time to get out. But Mussolini just caved in, and he sat there and nodded his head to Hitler while Hitler went on his tirade about the Jews and the communists and everything. And the general said, this is bad. And then during that meeting, they get the notice that Rome's been bombed, and they go, that's it. Yeah. And so what happened was, when Rome, the only person in Rome besides, there's the king in Rome, but there's Mussolini's in Rome. I mean, the Pope is in Rome, Pius XII, and the Pope could see the smoke coming up, because what had happened was the Allies were going to bomb the rail yards behind Termini Station, and these are World War II bombs. They don't go where you're supposed to go sometimes, and they drifted off and they bombed the San Lorenzo neighborhood, which is a working class neighborhood where I lived for a year, and so you can still see the bomb damage right next to the railroad yards. And they bombed St. Lawrence outside the walls, and you know, one of the papal churches, and so Pius XII is seeing the smoke and everything. He said, and he called his assistant Montini, who becomes Paul VI. He says, Montini, come on, get a lot of money. I think he got some, like, I think there were some Franciscans there. He said, get the money from them, and we're gonna go down there. And he did, and he distributed money, and he prayed with the people, and they were terrified. It was his head get choked up, and he was covered in dust and blood. It was an amazing thing. And then, about 2 hours later, the king comes. Boo! Get the hell out of here, you bum! And the king said, "That's it. Mussolini's going. That's what pushed him over." And so within a few days, Mussolini was thrown out of office. It's an amazing thing.
Well, the fascism in Italy, it was never really as anti-Semitic. That was sort of a pressure from Hitler.
Yeah, I mean, or pressure from Hitler, or Mussolini trying to kiss up to Hitler.
Yeah.
I mean, it was not. There's nothing in fascism, in its original form, that says anything about the Jews. And the Jews were in the fascist party at a higher percentage than the national average. So the fascist party was very popular among the Jews, and because there was no anti-Semitism in it at all, so it surprised everybody. Like, what's going on? And there's two things. It's the conquest of Ethiopia. I keep going back to that because that's a very important thing, because racism begins to kind of like rear its head with that conquest. And if racism is rearing its head, well, maybe the next step should be anti-Semitism, because we were going with Hitler anyway, you know. That I mean, there were people in the Italian cabinet who were Jewish. A lot of military officers were Jewish in the Italian Navy, especially. And then Mussolini's mistress was Jewish in the 20s and the early 30s. Margherita Sarfatti, who wrote his autobiography. She's the one who wrote it. Yeah, she was an extraordinary woman, and she was an intellectual and the whole. He really admired her, and he probably loved her more than anybody. You know, I think she was probably the love of his life, and then he dumps her, not because of Hitler. He kind of dumped her a little bit before that, but she went to Buenos Aires, and the Jewish community there like said, you know, go away, you know, and then he went with a different woman, Clara Petacci, who was a kind of a gangster, and she was a real, and she's the one who dies with him. They had a love affair as well. I mean, they were sincere, but.
It's interesting how the power dynamic between Mussolini and Hitler changed. Because in the beginning, Mussolini had all the power, and Hitler was looking up to him.
Yeah, he calls him his teacher.
Yeah, but by the time the 40s come along, everything has switched.
Oh, yeah.
And Mussolini is completely beholden to him to keep him in power.
Yeah. No, yeah, I mean, when Mussolini declares war, right, in June of 40, then everything hits the fan, right? I mean, in East Africa, Ethiopia, just, you know, it's a delaying action. That's all it is. They try to hold off the British as long as possible. Then in North Africa, it's a disaster, and which brings in Rommel. And then he invades Greece, which is a disaster. So in January of 41, Mussolini goes to Hitler and says, "God, they bailed me up." And Hitler said, "Well, then I'm calling the shots." And he said, "Okay, yeah, you can do that." You know, I mean, Hitler always respected the Italians. Not the Italians. He's always respected Mussolini. So he didn't try and run Italy. Like this wasn't Vichy France or anything like that. You know, the Italians had their own turf, and Hitler respected that until Mussolini falls from power. Then all bets are off, and it's a disaster.
That's when a lot of the anti-Semitism really rose.
Well, that's when
the German troops were actually applying the anti-Semitism in Italy, which it really hadn't been before.
Yeah. Well, in '38, Mussolini does these anti-Semitic decrees, but you know, and somebody said it was more harassment than anything else, and that's probably true to some extent. He did have camps for Jews and put them to work in certain places during the war. Okay, but it's it's typical Mussolini. I mean, he one thing Mussolini he comes across as like a shyster, a real bunco artist, and I think it was Ribbentrop. He was in Rome in like February of '43, saying we have to do something about the Jews now, and so I want the roundups to start, and you got to start shipping them to Germany, and Mussolini said, "Okay, yeah, you got it, right?" And then so people say, well, that's what Mussolini now threw his hand in with the Holocaust. But then he said to other people, he said, "Don't pay any attention to any of that stuff." He says, "I just had to get him out of the room. I couldn't stand listening to this chat." You know, so it isn't until the Germans really take over, then that's when the roundups begin.
Yeah,
you know, and then the death starts. Yeah.
But in terms of sheer numbers, the Italian survival or the Jewish survival rate in Italy was much better than any other occupied country.
Yeah,
even though Italy was part of the Axis.
Yeah, Italy and Denmark.
Yeah,
had the two highest rates of yeah, I mean, well, there's the Catholic Church again. I mean, the Catholic Church, I think, performed brilliantly in the Holocaust. There's problems with Pius XII, and he let himself down. Pius XII, he was a naturally a reserved character. There was some reasons why he didn't want to kind of come out with the full-throated condemnation. The people say, "Well, why don't you just excommunicate Hitler?" You know, I wouldn't do that. But I think the Dutch thing played a lot. That the Dutch bishops spoke out, and that made things worse for the Dutch Jews. I think that made an impression on Pius. And he didn't know what to do. And he was naturally reticent, and so he just blew it,
Do you think he knew the extent of the Holocaust during the war?
I don't know the full extent, but he knew something that was going on. There were Catholic chaplains with the Germans who were coming back saying, "You got to see what we're looking at," you know.
Yeah.
I mean, they told him that, you know. So he knew something terrible was going to happen, you know. And there are times. I mean, for example, when Hitler conquers Poland right away, he puts Cardinal Hland on the Vatican radio, the Polish primate, and he says, you know, tell him whatever you want, you know. Yeah. So it wasn't that, and what happened was the Israel, for example, always was very grateful to Pius XII, and then comes the vicar, or what do they call it, the deputy, the play in the Italians, the vicar, by that was a guy, a play about Pius XII in 1963, 64, and that changed people's opinions of Pius XII, and from then on it's been impossible to canonize him. I don't think he'll ever be canonized, but that's what changed. I mean, Golda Meir was very grateful to what he did for the Jews, and another part of that argument, you know, I always sound like an apologist for Pius XII, but they said he didn't have to tell the church what to do. They knew what to do, you know. They knew what to do. So
well, the church saved so many people in Italy.
Oh yeah,
the monasteries,
thousands. Yeah.
They hid so many children.
Yeah. Somebody said that once that the worst death count among the Jews in a single death count was when the Allies bombed Castel Gandolfo by mistake, and had a bunch of Jews who were being sheltered there. So the Vatican held Jews. Everybody did. You know, there was in what 40 early 44 I think it was, there was the hardcore fascists, okay, raided St. Paul outside the walls. They never should have done that. That was completely illegal, to round up the Jews, and there were a few thousand. I think 3,000 Jews in there. You know, so yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stories. Again, you know, there's so many stories of individual stories, and you know, the church wasn't the only people holding them out, hiding out. But it was the biggest. There's no question that they saved more lives than any other. I mean, the communists aren't going to hide the Jews because they can't hide the Jews. You know, the communists are hiding in the churches as well. You know, so you know, the Catholics had that ability to do that, and they did it. They did it. You know, I remember the people in I studied after World War II, the Christian Democrats, and so many of them were forged during that time. And one of my favorite Christian Democrats was Giorgio Lapira, who I love. He's been beatified, right? And he was a very devout Catholic. He becomes the mayor of Florence in the 1950s, and I've worked in his archives. People worship him, you know, and because he was such a simple, kind of almost a silly man. It was like Fools for Christ kind of thing, like Saint Francis or something. And I was talking to the Israeli diplomat in Belgium, and he was from Rome. He was born and raised in Rome. He was a kid in the Second World War, and he said that they were hiding the kids out, and they sent them all over the place. And he said my group was sent to a monastery in Tuscany, and so they were the head of the monastery was taking the kids, and they're going from cell to cell, you know, the monks' cells there, and he said, you three stay in this one, you three stay in this one, and then they came on, and Giorgio Lapira was in there because the Nazis are hunting Giorgio Lapira down, and Lapira said, what's going on? He said, well, we're putting the kids in these rooms, and so, but don't worry, we'll just go to the next room. And Lapira said, don't be ridiculous. Put them in. I have a car in the parking lot. I'll sleep in the back seat of the car. You know, and he did. So, you know, and the diplomat told me that with tears in his eyes. I mean, you know, he was such a nice man. You know, and he Lapira. He was a very close friend of Montini, right? Paul VI, and Lapira used to give away things all the time, and with the Christian Democrats, he would give away his coat to people on the street, and he would also give away the Christian Democrat his colleagues' coats. The guy would say, "Hey, Georgia, where's my coat? Oh, was that your coat? I gave it away." So when he dies, the old story was, and he was a third order Dominican, and he lived at St. Mark's in Florence. The Dominican church was now becoming a hotel, by the way.
Oh.
Yeah, which the Fra Angelico frescoes. So anyway, he lived in that complex, and it's his room is still there, as it was when he died. And there's a little canary cage hanging there. If the canary's dead, I guess. But he used to like to listen to the canaries singing, and he was that kind of character. So all the Christian Democrat bigwigs, all his old buddies, including another great guy, Amintore Fanfani, one of my favorites. He was the prime minister, and they were looking to he putting him together for the funeral, and he had given away all his ties, and they couldn't find a tie. So Fanfani went out to the store and said, "I got to buy a tie for Lapira." So that attracts me. I was I was in the Rome the diocesan archives, and one of the archivists was there. He was a student of Lapira, because Lapira taught Roman law at the University of Florence, and he broke down and started crying. He said Lapira was such a wonderful man. You don't see that too often about American politicians that often. So.
Well, I don't think in America you would have a party called the Christian
No,
Democrats
no,
anyway.
yeah.
It would be inconceivable.
It's interesting because I have friends who study Christian democracy in the United States, and there are some. And there's a guy at San Francisco. I think it's UC San Francisco, not University of San Francisco. And he does labor history, so that's how he does the Christian Democrats. The Catholic worker kind of stuff. And he said, it's interesting that you're not going to find too many American Christian Democrats. One though that he kind of felt was Mayor Joseph Alioto of San Francisco. He said he identified with the Christian Democrats. He had context. There is a Christian Democratic International, as all political parties have internationals, and it's interesting that they always have their affiliated, friendly parties. The Christian Democratic International, the affiliated party, is the Democratic Party in the United States.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know if that's changed, but it was 20 years ago. So.
I could see why in the 1960s, 70s it would have been that way.
Yeah.
Most Catholics, I think, were Democrats at the time.
Probably.
It's certainly not true now.
No, not anymore. Like the Italians, they said, Italo-Americans traditionally voted Republican for president and Democrat locally, or statewide.
Yeah. So what about the communists in how did they come about? Because they had serious amounts of power, say the 60s and 70s. They were an honest-to-God threat.
Oh yeah,
right?
well,
they're very anti-Catholic.
Well, they are.
Again, tempered by Italians.
Yeah.
They're anti-Catholic more in the other countries than they were in Italy, I think.
Yeah, well, the communists. You see, the thing is, I was just reviewing a book on communist propaganda films, made by the Italians in the 50s and 60s, and they said one thing is very interesting because and they knew that had happened, but they didn't want to talk about it too much. The funeral in 1964 of the head of the Communist Party, Palmiro Togliatti, right? Togliatti was a major communist. He was the second in command to Antonio Gramsci, the founder of the Communist Party. He's a solid communist. And when he died, the propaganda filmmakers were recording the funeral and all the people going by, and they said most of them were making the cross, and way more were doing that than doing the clenched fist communist salute. Well, there you go. I mean, Togliatti was very reluctant to come down. He would always criticize the Christian Democrats. You know, they're bums. You know, that kind of stuff. But not the church. You wouldn't go. You know, there was no threat in that regard. The Catholic Church felt there was a threat, and they were probably right. You know, in the long run, who knows what would have happened. But you know, I mean, like I say, I don't think Italy could have ever gone communist. I mean, really, sincerely communist. You know, they don't look good. You know. So, and so you were, you know, in that fabulous, soon to be award-winning book, The Devil and the Dolce Vita by Roy Domenico, the real anti-clericals are the lay parties, which are not, you know, the Marxists are lay parties, but what in Italy what they call the lay parties are the liberals, which are conservatives, the Republicans, which are kind of like moderate left, the radicals above all, the Social Democrats, which is an American Front organization. Those are the big anti-clerical parties. Yeah. For good old traditions, you know, I mean, the anti-clerical tradition runs very, very deep in Italy in certain areas. I mean, you know, it's like in the South, because of just for the same reason you find that in Spain, in Andalusia. The big estates, or Extremadura, same thing. You know, these guys were monsters, the big landowners, and the church supported them. Or sometimes the church was the landowner. So there was that tradition. Now, most of the South, I would say, is not anti-clerical, but there is a strong anti-clerical sentiment in the South, and that's where a lot of times you find these Protestant churches popping up. You know, the evangelical churches and stuff.
Yeah.
The Pentecostals. They make, if you go down the street in some village, boom, there it is. There's some kind of Pentecostal church there. Wow, you know.
Seems to me that you could find Italians who are first-rate Catholics, but who still have a disdain for, say, anybody above a bishop, right?
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
they've grown up in that scenario where they had so much power. Like if you grew up in one of the former papal states, especially.
on the other side, there's just the middle's like not existent almost in Italy, and now then you have the leagues on the right and the neo-fascists, which are doing